Welcome to Evolution Hour. Our internet connection is not burping like it was last week. I love the little clickety clacks and the analog clocks. And do not forget our tortucanwordpress.com. A bunch of resources are there, freely available, open access PDFs that relate to an awful lot of the issues that I've covered over the years. And although it's not as up to date as our wonderful little books, we still are quite happy with the content of them. So it looks like we've got a much better connection than we had last week, and we will see whether or not we have some guests showing up at this normal time or not. As you know, the main topic is to go through and perform a source analysis on the creationist book Titans, which is purporting to be an illuminating creationist treatment of dinosaurs. And boy, it's not all that detailed. This one, the taxa that I'm dealing with today is Spinosaurus, which has an interesting issue about whether or not it was aquatic in some respect, piscivorous. The teeth structure indicates that it liked to eat fish a lot, but just how aquatic and just how bear-like a terrestrial critter that could venture into the water for hunting purposes it was, has a bit of a contentious thing, which our creationists are riffing off of. They draw off of 2014 and 2020 papers by Ibrahim, and then a 2018 work by Henderson, which is critical of the scenario. It turns out that this is in an ongoing process. That Paul Serino, who was a co-author on the Ibrahim 2014 paper, wasn't on hand for the 2021, and a 2022 paper by him with the Henderson group pretty much suggests why. I'll be putting links to all these up in the main group because it's dicey that it is as aquatic as the Ibrahim group is going. Now that's largely about as far as our creationists are going into it. They're just riffing off of the existing technical scholarship. But one little item really jumped out at me. And this related to that 2020 paper. Although Ibrahim attributes the fossils to river delta environment, it doesn't seem plausible. Coelacanths live in water hundreds of meters deep. Furthermore, Dr. Ibrahim's more recent discoveries showed undoubted land dinosaurs and pterosaurs in this formation. It makes much more sense that an enormous watery cataclysm washed them together. Oh, gosh, no. This 2020 paper is a different 2021 than the first one I mentioned. This is a geology work that Serino was in fact involved with. Hello, Vesta. And it's a long one. It's a couple hundred pages long and well worth the foray because they're going into all the grisly little details. It's interesting that Sarfati and Tay cited no documentation whatsoever for this claim about the watery catastrophe, and that other than the Ibrahim paper, as supposedly buttressing their position. And therefore, they sink or swim, to carry the metaphor a little bit farther on that base. First off, right off the bat, coelacanths weren't exclusively deep marine critters. Modern surviving coelacanths live in a fully deep water environment, but that's not the case for all the other ones. And either Sarfati and Tay would be aware of this from the papers and things they would have had to have dealt with on coelacanths, or they're suppressing the information, or are they just ignorant of it? I don't know, because they don't get close enough to ascertain it. But at any rate, I'll be putting up links to a bunch of papers that relate to this stuff. 2006 one from Friedman, and a character that's going to be popping up a lot, Cavan, from 2013 and 2020 on various taxa in the coelacanths, how they vary in size, and even large coelacanths can, in principle, ones that are 12 feet long, which is a quite big one for the forms that are being found in this Chem formation. That is the stuff where these Spinosauruses are found. But estuarial things and river drainage systems and the like, I mean, you know, the Amazon River is a river, and yet, boy, it can have quite large critters swimming around in it. As for the pterosaurs, well, first off, if you think about a pterosaur, and they fly along and they can crash into a little piece of water and get trapped, which is what they often do when you have fairly full fossils of them, like the Solnhofen and some of the other deposits. They tend to be in those kind of environments. That apparently is not what's going on here. You're getting like teeth and a stray pterosaur bone because of the nature of these things. They're able to identify these precisely, but there are no articulated skeletons. Some of them are, in fact, from the alverosaurs. I think the great big, I think I've mispronounced that. Anyway, it starts with an A. It's a long, icky little name. It's some of these great big, super humongous Quetzalcoatl size ones, but they're not complete articulated skeletons. They're just little bits and pieces of stuff. And so if you actually go through what taxa are around, and the coelacanths, I may be putting in as well some stuff on the more recent systematics papers and the like, able to get caught up to speed on their diversity and how the last ants were living in freshwater environments in this particular group. And so the idea that they can't be involved in here because of the supposed unique marine environment, plus the Big Slosh is not explaining the details. This is parts of stuff, little bits and pieces of things, that some of which are getting watered, run down through the river system. Some of them may be from a critter that died nearby and eventually got entombed by the various things. And there's a whole paleo structure they'll involve. At no point has Sarfati and Tay alluded to any creationist account of the Chem formation. And I'm not exactly expecting them to ever do that, because that would involve actually having to work out their system. Part 2 of the show is also kind of about water stuff, because it involves our scuba diving lizards. There was a post from Philip Bell from 2022, and I'll be putting the link up to that. It's not a huge piece, and it's got a few little technical papers that I had to track down for looking into all of this. And the nature of these things are as well an indication of the deck stacking that's going on. It's basically gee-whiz mode on the convergent adaptation of semi-aquatic anole lizards. And they're riffing off of some older and some newer work, none of which, incidentally, of course, was ever done by creationists. Let me make a little edit on my little doodad here. It's always fun when I am running off of 2 mouses at the same time. One for my PC and one for the doodad. Anyway, I want to make sure everything is coordinated so I can dump in all the material on it. Anyway, one of the papers that Bell is riffing off of, and by the way, you'll really enjoy Philip Bell in volume 2 of the Rocksmith there, because he pops up in a lot of different contexts, especially in relation to a different Bell, the supposed intertwined sauropods that are supposedly depicted on a tomb in Britain during the Middle Ages. And and he's literally the benchmark source that's gotten riffed on for like 20 some odd years by creationists. That's going to be part of the material that we'll be discussing in Rocks 2. It's going to be fun. Anyway, so there's a 2008 paper by Bauer on the global diversity of anole lizards, which excellent, fine paper. And a little short general piece by Losas from 2009 on Cell, from Cell magazine, that goes into some little bits of material. And then a 2015 paper from Scarpetta on cave dwelling ones, which Bell cited only regarding that cave dwelling thing. Now, Bauer's paper laid out a lot of relevant data points that Bell never addressed. Of 5,000 species of these lizards, only 73, and by the way, belonging to 11 different families, and mainly in just 3, regularly use the freshwater habitats, and that's largely in the tropics. Are presumably each one of these separate kinds, because families are kind of kinds. We're not getting any of that in Bell's analysis. They don't tend to go that far. And of course, they don't have any creationist literature to cite on the subject other than not really on the pointed issue. Anyway, The meat of the issue involved the two newer papers that Bell was riffing off of. One from Boccia in 2021 and another one from 2021 by Baeckens, whose name, by the way, Bell misspelled, lopping off the S from his name. So that's an indication that maybe he's not being all that attentive. I'm really focused on odd typographical errors. There's a piece that I was just analyzing on religious information in creationism. And it was on Christmas and that, and it's going to be going into the big religion book in future. But the sidebar was that they were the guy. So I think this was another Sarfati post that he's citing a particular paper, and I have no clue what it is. The references are so vague that I don't know whether it's from a book or whether it's from an article, and even the article is unobtainable that was cited as one of the things, and the page numbers don't match up, so it can't be from that one. And it's from an obscure journal that is unavailable online, no references to it in Google, no one's citing it, other than apparently people at CMI. And the fellow in question apparently is kind of associated with the Tim LaHaye end times movement and that. So it's an interesting little sidebar. But anyway, so always pay very close attention to people's citations, especially if we're dealing with pseudoscientists, because sometimes those little weird typographical footnotey things are clues to their bad method. It's clues to what they're drawing on apologetically. It's clues to what they're not dealing with, or whether they're getting the material secondarily, if they're misspelling it in a way that turns out that's inaccurate for the source, so they may have been getting it from somewhere else. There's a whole bunch of little tools that you can deal with on here. So the issue then that the creationists would have to deal with is a set of mutations involved as designed in this aquatic adaptation or not. Bell doesn't venture into any of that. Instead, he's going all origins or bust by asserting that, quote, this was a far cry from explaining how such a complex skin surface originated in the first place. But both papers went into considerable detail on how each of them pegging this process as a spandrel, which is a system that is developed for one purpose that takes on new attributes in different contexts as a co-opted adaptation. And Boccia offered 5 sources, numbers 45 to 49, ranging from 1997 to 2020 on this specific point, and discussed examples where the plastron bubble, that is a little thing that involves in the trapping of the air, didn't occur among a lot of these. And so the whole Baeckens paper was about the range and variation in that skin element as to what was causing this phenomenon of how they can trap air for their little underwater adaptations. And it was tracking a lot of the same works that Boccia was citing. Now, these would be instances of really base work that's being done and setting out the parameters for future study, which I can expect the scientists to be doing, and I expect Bell probably won't be following up on. So 5-10 years from now, even though very probably the CMI post may get recycled as they tend to do on a fairly regular basis, but they'll just be waving it in front of you and not doing any follow-up work. But in one area, Bell clearly wasn't paying close attention, as he insisted, quote, since the scaly skin surface of anoles is much more hydrophobic, water-hating than human skin, you might think it would be even harder for them to hold on to an air bubble. Paradoxically, the opposite is true. Well, if he'd read the Baeckens paper that he cited, they had gone into this precursor spandrel and noting, quote, the outermost layer of the reptilian epidermis is composed of proteinaceous beta-keratin, and citing Alabardi and Tony 2006, Tony et al. 2007. I won't be putting the links up to those. Not all of them are available open access and that, but you can track them down if you wish, which is by nature rather hydrophilic, the opposite of what Bell was claiming, and citing Ottoman Hansen 2006, Bartholay et al. 2016, Bormashenko et al. 2007, Spinner et al. 2014. That's a lot of source material on this. We've got a matter of lineages that have dynamics that are already present in their biology. The creationists are just loving to point out things that are already present in their biology. And that kind by natural means in some lineages, particularly when in an environment where it's an advantage to do so, take on a new aspect that builds on an already existing system that develops a new adaptation. That's natural evolution at work. It's interesting that it's a thing I'll probably be doing a little post on a future piece that just came out in the Journal of Creation. And I think I heard about it via either Zach Hancock or Dan Stern Cardinale or Joel Duff. It was going on in the little side chat in this science friends group that we have on Twitter. And I'm never going to call it X. But anyway, there's a brand new Journal of Creation piece that is effectively trying to account for the marsupials in Australia as being deliberately guided there by God. In other words, they're giving up on trying to find naturalistic explanations for the biogeographic distribution and all of that. And so seeing the divine hand, basically it's an appeal to miracles. But along the way, when they're talking about their non-designed or their created non-evolutionary framework, all they're doing is repeating the elements of natural evolution, of things that are arising by natural mutation means and taking on new elements because of changing environment and all that. They even name drop natural selection, which shows that they're not getting the cue from ICR, where that is becoming verboten because of Guliusa. It's an interesting mess that we'll want to be alluding to in the new book, in addition to all the other little topics that's coming along. And there was a really delightful thing that popped up to my surprise. For those of you who may follow Vice Rhino, who does largely criticism of extremist religion positions and creationism on YouTube. And he was doing a new piece on the religious prejudice in certain quarters to trans youth and why this was a bad thing and how questionable it was even from a theological perspective. And so it was a thing that I was watching, and it was like about a 30-minute show. And which was delicious and interesting on its own ground, because it then prodded me to look into some of the little scriptural references that were being brought up and get some scholarly literature on that, all of which is going to relate to stuff in the religion evolution book for the future. We're going to keep busy. But the little sidebar was right at the end of the show. He did a filler where he was talking about the little stuff that's in the background of his office where he does the videos. And there's a model of an Apollo rocket that's laid on its side, and he was talking about how he and his kids helped assemble that, and he pointed out some books, and when he looked up close, it's the 4 of the Answers books from Answers in Genesis, and underneath it, symbolically, is Our Rocks Were There, which he was praising as a delicious demolition of the Answers books. And so thank you, Vice Rhino, for the little shout out on that front, and the fact that you were enjoying the work. And I suspect you will be enjoying Volume 2 when we complete all of that and continue the process on it, because it's source methods is such a delicious topic to work with, because it hones the way your mind works on all matters. If you do the principles carefully that you work out to explain why creationists have their head up their ass, and apply it to everything in terms of political discourse and economic policy and a whole bunch of other stuff, it's a universal toolkit that you want to pay attention to the data field, and you want to look and see who is paying attention to the data field and arriving at sound conclusions based on it, and know the difference between things that are tentative and unclear and that there's still an open issue on, and other things that are pretty much settled and we can move on to something else because that's kind of a grounded thing. And if somebody comes along and says that that grounded thing is not really true, then you really have to ask for a hell of a lot of evidence on it, and then sit back to find out what dogmatic material that they've actually been drawing on, which means that they haven't actually got to the right point at all. And that's so it's no coincidence that people at, say, the National NCSE or people at various groups that have been studying creationism over the years will find that they're starting to have to look in other areas like climate science denialism, which is a very closely networked thing with that conservative evangelical culture, even though there are examples of non-conservative evangelicals who are climate science deniers. But there's a cross-reference. And you can even find an evolutionist who's a climate denier, like Ian Plimer. We allude to it in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, because it's a relevant little sidebar to call attention to. So you can find people who seem to be on the same side as you would think, but underneath it, maybe a more superficial methodology. And Plimer falls into that category. Anyway, that the spillover of that methods approach has been kicking into high gear. The people who know me and has been following what I've been doing over the last, yipes, dozen years or more, will know that I've spilled over into areas of legal matters. The very first debate I ever had was with a squishy creationist, but basically is a hyper-conservative religious lawyer. That was my very first debate with him. It was on the Greasy v. Galloway case. And so I've been applying this methodology to every area where it's naturally there to look at. And as everybody that's also been following my thing, I don't take anybody's word for things, even exquisitely crafted, brilliant scientists. And it's precisely because I admire quite a few people. Look at Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock. They're way above my pay grade on genetics. I'm not taking their word for the various assertions that they're offering in their videos. I'm tracking down the source material and confirming that, in fact, their analyses of these things are completely valid and they've got the goods. And that's a thing that you will spot in rigorous science discourse. And in areas where things are dicier, they can be in regular science journals. In fact, you can have, we're going to be alluding to the case of the Younger Dryas impact theory as a little sidebar info box in Rocks 2, because it involves some of the same characters that pop up in other areas, including whether Sodom and Gomorrah were real and were hit by a boloid. And so there's a quirky sidebar issue of that. Greetings, sentient beings. Hi, Purple. But it's also a useful litmus test bit for anybody that wants to dive into it. And since almost all of the back and forth was going on at proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, all the papers are open access, so anybody can follow up on it his own to see what is going on. And this one has been just going on for years. Holy smokes. Whether or not the bunch, the upshot I would contend is it's not impossible that there was a boloid impact at the time of the Younger Dryas climate blip, but most of the evidence suggests that it's not a major contributing factor, that if it occurred at all, and there's a lot of questionable issues on that, whereas the big climate fluctuation, this is like 12,000 years ago for the Younger Dryas, it comes up as a natural issue because it's leading into a discussion of the cultural shifts that are going on about the peoples that are eventually going to be telling flood tales. And so it connects up to the Black Sea flooding hypothesis, which is a dicey one. And of course, then the main areas that relate to, say, the biblical flood story that is the most salient don't have anything to do with the Younger Dryas. But it also allows to bring up a lot of information about the fluctuation in the Neolithic of the populations that are shifting back and forth, and the introduction of agriculture and particular domesticated cattle and wheat, all of these various stuff that's swirling back and forth, about which there's just a humongous amount of science in addition to the archaeology stuff that's being done. And because we have existing examples, you can look at the DNA because this is relatively recent material, so they can often extract actual genetic information out of these sites and the bodies that are found and burials and the like from this period. And you may want to wonder how much of that's being discussed by the creationists. Not much. And when they do bump into the genetic material in the Jensen and Sanford style stuff, holy smokes, they get it wrong, as Dan Stern Cardinale and others have pointed out. We'll be alluding to all of that along the way in the sidebar, so everybody will be able to get up to speed on that. So the issue of just talking about the Big Slosh flood opens up a humongous amount of side connections that I don't think any other works have actually delved into on quite the scale that Jackson and I are doing it. And we also have the advantage of coming at this with the current technical literature in hand. And there's constantly stuff materializing that I go, oh, brand new paper on Neolithic Mesopotamia. Whoop, slip that into the references so that it will be as up to date as possible. And anybody then that wants to follow up under the premise, don't take our word for it. Thousands of sources in this stuff, you know, it's all there. Go ahead, look it up, track it down, learn, investigate, build your own model and work out your own concepts and ground them solidly on information. We'll be having such really nice stuff on human evolution. We'll definitely want Erica to read through our material once we get that out of the way. There's still quite a lot of geology material that's really going to be coming up. Steve Bauman and others who reviewed the geology material for volume 1. We're going to want to have you do that as well when we get to that geology stuff. It looks like the big Grand Canyon material will be in a chapter that is on paleo worlds, and the paleo worlds that weren't, regarding the fictional environment that the creationists imagine is going on prior to the flood and during the flood, compared to the detailed context that we can have on that. And the Grand Canyon will be covered as a beautiful leitmotif because it sprawls across Precambrian material all the way down into the Mesozoic. And so it sprawls across a wide area. Although most of the work will be relating to the answers books as the scaffolding, we don't leave out intelligent design. And in fact, this chapter that I'm working on that Jack sent on to me, which has quite a big section on the snotty legacy of Stephen Meyer and his, and now joined by Gunter Beckley, on Cambrian and Cambrian taxa, and how Byzantine they are, trying to wriggle around through that without ever telling us what the hell they think happened with anything, which reminds us of the absolute inutility of intelligent design as a conceptual model. If it was as useful a concept, wouldn't they be anxious to work out a systematics to be able to say, we can delineate one form from another, and if they can't find discrete kinds, types, call them what you want, then aren't they by direction forced into accepting common ancestry, which most of the gang at the intelligent design movement do not accept? You've got the wiffle wafflers like Behe and Denton and Beckley, who kind of sort of on alternating Tuesdays seem to be okay with a whole bunch of common ancestry. And then when you try to find any examples of what they mean by that, it just disappears in a fog bank. But Steve Meyer doesn't accept common descent. Bill Dembski doesn't accept common descent. And I would suspect that Klinghoffer and Casey Luskin don't accept common descent. And so maybe they could all be locked in a room and come out with a position on things to try to make sense out of any of the stuff. But it's unlikely ever to be the case that intelligent design, any more than old Earth creationism, is ever going to get around to this issue, because their whole conceptual frame involves only going as far as they need to build up the notion that they have somehow disposed of naturalistic evolution. And so they tiptoe into origins or bust a lot, and they tiptoe into the gee whiz natural theology angle a little bit, in the same way that Bell was doing with the stupid aquatic lizards, and not going very far with it and not working out their own conception. The intelligent designers theoretically could accept created types or kinds in that framework. It almost sounded like Michael Denton was trending in that direction in his old 1980s stuff, but he never went beyond that. And you read the current material that he does all the way up to his 2016 book, and it hasn't moved an inch. This is somebody whose conceptual frame has simply not developed at all. And it's just wheel spinning. And often there's a curious example that, again, jumps out when you look at works like that, of where I noticed it a little bit with Nathaniel Jensen, is you'll have a mixture of recent source material and then a lot of stuff that's really old, 80s, 90s, which suggests stuff that they were getting when they were doing collegiate work and developing their formative ideas about stuff. And they've kind of hung on to these little bliplets like cuddle blankets from days gone by. And then sprinkled in newer examples of things, but not to the extent that it develops any clear conception. Well, anyway, that I think pretty well covers the material on that. Our signal has held up quite nicely. Oh yes, and of course I need to call attention to our wonderful and absolutely essential patrons, without whose assistance every month this would be a hell of a lot tighter world to deal with. Our colleagues, our researchers, our assistant researchers, our friend levels, and all the legacy patrons that have helped us over the years. I can't do it without you. I'm just a Social Security retiree, and I get a little trickle of royalties from the various books that I do. Shameless plug, buy more books, give more royalties to the RJ and Jackson. We proceed the best we can on that. Let me also put up our excessively noisy advert for The Rocks Were There to remind everybody it's a real thing, and it makes an excellent doorstop or something to drop over the head of a creationist who is unsuspecting just how big the source is. And if you crack open the contents, wow, there's an awful lot of nice stuff in there, and it's thoroughly indexed and thoroughly researched, and we're terribly proud of it. And Jackson and I are going to be continuing on these little projects until one of the more of us have been hit by a meteor. We'll find out what that is. So let me cue up that little puppy. And there we go. And then put on our share screen and fire away. And presumably, we will have something for volume 2, and we will probably be making the rounds, hitting up to see like Apologia and a few of the other video venues that have interviewed us when we came out with the first book. We'll try to be doing that as well. For all of you in spots getting like tornadoes, like in the east, yikes. And storms and muck and gunk, stay safe and watch out and hunker down. My area is generally resistant to those sorts of things, although we can occasionally get a volcano once in a while, and there's always the concern over on the coast of the Cascadia Fault going in that. But for the moment, all right. And then, of course, we can worry about solar flares and Yellowstone erupting and some of the other little things. But that's farther down the pile than trying to get through the November election and into next year without democracy as we know it collapsing completely. So Everybody stay safe. Keep on your watch for wooden penguins. If you got some spare cash and some curiosity, want some summer reading and haven't gotten the various books, grab onto them. Consider, if you've got a public library in that, of getting ones and donating to them. I've done that with my 2 novels at the local Spokane Public Library, so people can actually read that as well. Cost me some, not obviously, the more things that are in the library, the more royalties I'm not getting from selling the books directly, but it's a trade-off. Anyway, everybody stay safe, and we will hopefully be on without a fuss a week from now. And closing off.